In this tutorial, I'm going to guide you through the process of using the Amazon Web Services PHP SDK to create instances. So this basically allows you to define your own custom PHP script that then allows you to connect to the Amazon Web Services cloud infrastructure and deploy your own custom instances. So let's take a look at an overview of the steps covered in this guide. So first, I'm going to show you how to set up a virtual host in OpenLiteSpeed. Then I'll show you how to access the VirtualHost directory using Samba. Third, I'll show you how to create a project in PHPStorm. Then I'll show you how to download and install the Amazon Web Services PHP SDK. And finally, we'll then create the Amazon Web Services Lightsail PHP client. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to open an SSH connection to the server that I'm actually going to use for this project. So I'm just going to run the command ssh administrator at 192.168.88.100. So I'm just going to specify the password for this user, and as you can see, I've actually successfully logged in. So I'm going to elevate my access to the root user using the sudo su command. Then I'll change to the OpenLiteSpeed server root directory. So I'll just type in cd and then use our local lsws. So I'm going to create a directory named aws.local. Then change into this directory and then create another directory called public HTML. So these are the two directories that we're going to be working with within this project. So as you can see, we now have that public HTML directory. So next, we're going to log into the OpenLiteSpeed web admin. So I'm just going to type in the username and password for the web admin. And once logged in, I'm going to navigate to the VirtualHosts section and then create a new VirtualHost. So I'm going to set the name for this VirtualHost to aws.local and also set the VirtualHost root. So I'm just going to copy the server root name there and then specify the aws.local directory. So I'm just going to copy the config file for the virtual host. Then I'll just change the name there to aws.local as well. I'm going to set enable scripts and external apps to yes and then set restraint to no. Then I'll just set the max keep alive request parameter to 1000. So once this is done, you just need to click on the save button and then click on the click to create link to create the config file. So I'll just save the changes there and then edit the VirtualHost config file that we've just created. Click on the general tab and then click edit. So I'm just going to set the document root, which is VirtualHost root / public HTML. So within this public HTML directory, this is where we're going to have all of the files for this project. So I'm going to set the domain name as well as the domain alias. And then I'll just enable gzip and broadly compression and then click on save. So once this is done, you can then proceed to the index file section. So click on edit and then set the index file. So that's going to be index.html and index.php. So these are the two index files that the virtual host is going to be looking for when someone tries to access this site. So I'm just going to click the save changes button, and then we're then going to move on to the rewrite tab. So click on edit and then set enable rewrite to yes, auto load from .htaccess to yes, and then click save. So I'm not going to configure login for now, so I'm just going to then proceed to the listener section and click edit on the default listener. So click add and then select the aws.local virtual host and then just type in an asterisk on the domains field. So click on save and then reload or restart the Lightspeed web server. So we now have the virtual host set up. So I'm just going to elevate my access to the root user on my Mac, and I'm going to edit the host configuration file on my MacBook. So I'm just going to add the IP address 192.168.88.100, and I'm also going to point that to aws.local. Press Ctrl+O, press enter to confirm, and then press Ctrl+X to exit the file. So I'm going to switch back to the SSH connection for the server, and then I'm going to open up the smb.conf configuration file for Samba. So you need to have this configuration in place so that you can be able to access the aws.local directory directly from the Mac or Windows device that you have. So I'm just going to click on the connect to server finder option, and then specify the IP address for the server. So as you can see, I've successfully opened up the aws.local directory directly on my MacBook. So I'm going to fire up my favorite PHP IDE, which is PHPStorm, and I'm going to create a new project. So I'm just going to select the public HTML directory, which is within the aws.local directory. So that's the directory I'm going to choose, and then click on create. So we now have a project created directly from the server where the actual project is going to be hosted from. So I'm going to create a new file named index.php, and we're just going to test PHP to see what version we have. So I'm just going to type in PHP info. And before we test this, we need to make a small change within the OpenLiteSpeed configuration. So I'm going to edit the VirtualHost mapping and directly set the aws.local domain. Click on save, and I'll just edit the other VirtualHost mapping that I have. So I'm just going to directly set the domain name for that, and also click on the save changes button. So I'm just going to restart Lightspeed so that these changes actually take effect. So I'm going to open up a new browser window or a browser tab, and then navigate to aws.local, and as you can see, we actually have PHP 8.1.27 running. Okay, so we can then proceed to the next step, which is actually to download the PHP SDK. So I'm going to run a Google search for AWS PHP SDK, and then look for the download link or the install link. So I'm just going to click on the install link, and then there's a command or an installation command that we just need to copy. So I'm just going to scroll down and then copy the composer command there, and then switch back to the PHPStorm IDE. So I'm just going to open up the terminal and then paste in the command for installing the Amazon Web Services PHP SDK. So the installation should take about a minute or so. It will largely depend on the performance of your internet connection. But once you have the SDK installed, you can pretty much access any Amazon Web Services service directly from PHP. So I'm just waiting for the installation to complete, and then we'll then proceed to set up the Lightsail client. So the installation should be done in about a few moments now, and there you have it. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to type in require and then vendor./autoload.php. So that actually autoload a couple of classes, including the Amazon Web Services PHP SDK. Then I'll just set this script to use the AWS Lightsail and then Lightsail client. So I'm going to define a function named AWS Lightsail client, and then I'll specify AWS region as an argument, and then I'll create a try catch block. So let me just catch that exception here, and then I'll actually just directly echo it from here. So I'll just get the message and then directly echo if any exception happens actually. So I'll create a switch statement, and I'll specify the AWS region as an argument, and I'll actually have a form whereby if someone selects maybe a Virginia data center, the switch statement will actually set a variable named data center to US East 1 and then break out of that condition. So I'm just going to create multiple conditions for different data centers or regions that maybe a user could select on your PHP application. So that's going to be US East 2, and I'll also repeat that for all of the other regions. So I actually had this written down earlier, so I'll just copy and paste that into the project. So I then need to rename all of this to the same variable. So I'm just going to press the Alt key on my keyboard and then place my cursor on the variable name that I want to change. So it needs to be data center, that's the name of the variable. And there we have it. So we now have a switch statement that checks for, or that sets the correct AWS Lightsail region name. So as a default, we'll just set it back to the AWS region that was specified on the when the function was called, actually, or instantiated. So I'm just going to add a comment here. So that's going to be set to the region, so where it starts and ends. I kind of like doing this so that I know what this particular block of code does. So the next thing to do is we're going to set up the client, the actual Lightsail client. So I'll just add a comment for where the Lightsail client starts and ends. Okay, and then we're going to define a variable. So I'm just going to call this variable AWS Lightsail client, and it's going to be a new Lightsail client actually. So there's a bunch of parameters that we need to set. We need to set the region, and that's going to be equal to data center. And we also need to set the version of the PHP SDK to use, and I'm just going to set that to latest. And we also need to set the credentials. So that is actually going to be something I'm going to show you how to do within the IAM service of AWS actually. But basically you need a key and you also need a secret. So you need to set these within the IAM service. So which is something I'll show you to do within the next video for this topic. So there we have it. So we now have the Lightsail client set up, and I'm just going to add a return statement whereby it's just going to return the Lightsail client. So you can then take that return statement and choose any supported action that the client gives you. So basically, this is how you can start off using the PHP SDK to create a Lightsail client. So this is the PHP script that we have. So you can easily copy this script, or you can check for the link in the video description of where you can also download the same exact script. So that's been it. We've reached the end of this tutorial. In the next video, I'm then going to show you how you can use the Lightsail client that we've created to actually deploy instances. Please consider to like and subscribe to the channel, and please also share this video with your peers, colleagues, and friends. I hope this tutorial has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.